officers and make something happen for us?
I don't have that kind of power. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. We'll see you back here at 6 o'clock.
Tonight, breaking news, the Atlanta police chief stepping down in the wake of a deadly police shooting. Investigators looking closely at this video. An attempted arrest that turned into a struggle. The suspect running away with a stun gun, turning back towards the officers. Investigators say he pointed the stun gun, then one of the officers opened fire. 10 standoffs, protests for justice turning into takeovers in several American cities. In Asheville, North Carolina, Nashville, Tennessee, and that massive autonomous authorities threatening to move in and move them out. How will it end? As America gets back to business, coronavirus cases are rising in 22 states. Florida with 3 straight days of record cases. Miami beaches now. In Arizona, a record number of people on ventilators. The Texas hospitalization rate up 42% since Memorial Day. And here in New York City, the first weekend since restrictions were eased. Crowds gathering in the streets, few wearing masks. Beijing, China in, quote, wartime emergency mode after workers test positive at a giant wholesale food market. The market closed, the neighborhood on lockdown, and schools shut down. Officials fearing a massive outbreak. Also breaking tonight, the worst fears confirmed. Police identified the remains found as the missing siblings J.J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan. Their bodies found buried on their stepfather's property. The president's rare reversal. Trump giving in, moving his massive campaign rally to avoid holding it on a date commemorating the end of slavery as the president addresses West Point grads amid tensions with military leaders. Deadly blast. 10 people killed when a tanker truck carrying liquefied gas explodes on a highway. And treasure in the attic, the extraordinary collection of vintage baseball memorabilia that 97-year-old Uncle Jimmy left to his heirs. The legacy could bring them millions.
From ABC News, this is ABC World News Tonight.
And good evening. Thanks for joining us on this Saturday. I'm Tom Yamas. We're going to start with some breaking news just in from Atlanta. The police chief just stepping down in the wake of a deadly officer-involved shooting. Investigators looking closely at this video right here, an attempted arrest in a Wendy's parking lot, turning to a struggle over a stun gun. The suspect then running, turning back towards the officers. Investigators say he pointed that stun gun at them, then one of the officers opened fire. The mayor said she believes it was an unnecessary use of deadly force. ABC's Janae Norman leads us off.
Tonight, this violent struggle that turned deadly is under investigation. Georgia authorities reviewing video showing Atlanta police shooting and killing Rayshard Brooks when he ran away after allegedly resisting arrest.
I don't want anyone in any circumstances to rush to any form of judgment. It's very easy to do in these cases on either side. We realize there's a tremendous amount of emotion.
Friday night at 10:33, officers were called to this Wendy's parking lot about complaints that Brooks was allegedly asleep in his vehicle, blocking the drive-thru. The officers claim he failed a sobriety test. They say when they went to arrest him, he resisted. Police say in the struggle, he grabs a stun gun from one of the officers. In this surveillance video, you can see him running away, and he appears to point the stun gun at the officers.
At that point, turns around and it appears to the eye that he points the taser at the Atlanta officer. At that point, the Atlanta officer reaches down and retrieves his weapon from his holster, discharges it, strikes Mr. Brooks there on the parking lot, and he goes down. That information has been corroborated by a witness that we have interviewed.
Tonight, the police chief now resigning after weeks of criticism. The mayor calling for the officers involved to be fired.
I do not believe that this was a justified use of deadly force and have called for the immediate termination of the officer.
All right, Janae Norman joins us now live. And Janae, tonight, the mayor, who we just saw right there, commenting on the police chief's resignation, saying this is bigger, that there's been a disconnect between the department and the community's expectations.
Yeah, Tom, the mayor saying the police chief has offered to step aside immediately so the city may move forward with urgency and work to rebuild the trust so desperately needed in that community. Tom?
Janae Norman following that breaking news for us tonight. Janae, thank you. This is the third weekend of protests against police brutality and racism. People marching in Philadelphia and in Washington, D.C., including at what's now being called Black Lives Matter Plaza. But in several cities, protests turned to takeovers and tense standoffs with authorities. Here's ABC's Zachary Quiche.
Tonight, tensions are building between police and protesters. In Nashville, demonstrators seizing the steps of the state capitol. On Friday night, claiming control and renaming the area after civil rights icon Ida B. Wells, calling it an autonomous zone.
They are prepared to be arrested if they have to leave. That's a different step.
The group camped out overnight. The governor there threatening action, saying lawlessness, autonomous zones, and violence will not be tolerated. In Asheville, North Carolina, protesters attempted to block the freeway, officers moving in to get rid of those barriers.
What do we want? When do we want it? Now!
Those crackdowns come as Seattle remains in an armed standoff. For 6 days, protesters have taken over a six-block area, driving police from one of their own precincts.
This is the closest I've seen since being a 20-year professional of public safety service of our country to becoming a lawless state.
Police are trying to defuse the situation and negotiating with protesters, saying they will only go in if there's an active shooter. Tonight, 19 days after the killing of George Floyd, major protests show no sign of slowing. Thousands hitting the streets in Philadelphia, Boston, and the nation's capital. Today in New York, Governor Andrew Cuomo giving a 9-month deadline for governments across the state to come up with reforms or see their funding cut.
We're going to birth a new vision for a police force, community by community, because there is no one-size-fits-all.
Tom, protesters have been adamant they want police departments defunded and that money reallocated to other social services. In New York City, leadership has expressed their intent to cut $1 billion out of the local police budget. Tom?
Okay, Zachary, thank you. Next to the unrelenting rise in the cases of the coronavirus as America reopens. Tonight, there are more than 2 million confirmed cases and more than 115,000 lives lost. Miami beaches reopened this weekend, even as Florida reported a record number of new cases 3 days in a row. Meanwhile, New Orleans bars are reopening for the first time. And here in New York City, crowds are in the streets of the East Village on the first weekend that restrictions were eased, not everyone wearing masks. Health officials fear that could lead to a surge in new cases in 2 weeks' time. Here's ABC's Kaylee Hartung.
Tonight, 3 of the most populous states in the country hitting record highs for new coronavirus cases. Fears now mounting that some reopen too early. The Houston area, particularly hard.
Reopening was happening faster than what we locally would have liked.
Texas began easing restrictions more than a month ago, and since Memorial Day, hospitalizations are up 42%. Florida reporting a record jump in new cases for the 3rd straight day. The governor blaming it on a farm workers outbreak.
These are workers that are working close together. Once one gets it, it tends to spread very rapidly.
Miami Beach is open for the first weekend since the pandemic hit. Groups are limited to 10 people and masks are required. Tonight in Arizona, a record number of people on ventilators and hospitalizations are on the rise. This father in Phoenix losing 5 family members to the virus.
By the grace of God, people have shown us a lot of support. People have been calling, asking, what do you need?
The CDC saying strict lockdowns may be needed if cases rise dramatically. But despite the uptick in certain states, Dr. Anthony Fauci says a second wave of the virus can be prevented.
We don't necessarily have to have a second wave as long as we have the capability when those inevitable infections come up to be able to handle them in an effective way.
So far, Oregon and Utah,
them in an effective way.
Oregon and Utah, the only states to delay the next stage of reopenings. But cities like Nashville and Tucson now hitting the pause button too. In New York, today was the lowest number of deaths since the start of the pandemic, 32. New video showing large groups of people turning streets into Manhattan's version of Bourbon Street. Bands playing, customers gathering around, many without masks.
I also say especially to my young friends. This is a mask. This is a chin guard. Nobody told you to wear a chin guard. Wear a mask.
A mandatory mask rule in Orange County, California, sparking a fierce debate.
We are imprisoned by lockdowns, personal masks over our face, mouth, and nose.
The county's chief health officer resigning after residents threatened revolt over the rule. Officials later dropping the mask requirement. But not all residents agree.
We don't like people telling us what we can do and what we can't do. We like our freedom. We like our liberties.
And you feel safe.